I thought it was just another job interview. I dressed well, prepared my answers, and walked in with confidence. But what happened next left me completely shocked. I never expected this, and I'm sure you won't either. Stay with me till the end, because this story is something you need to hear. It was finally happening. After months of searching, endless applications, and frustrating silence from companies, I had landed a job interview. This could be my chance, my opportunity to finally move forward. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my shirt, making sure every detail was perfect. My hands were slightly shaky, not from fear, but from excitement. I had prepared for this moment. I had rehearsed my answers, researched the company, and told myself, "You're ready." As I stepped out of my house, the fresh morning air filled my lungs. I took a deep breath, calming my nerves. The city was alive, cars moving fast, people rushing to work, the sound of footsteps echoing on the pavement. I was just one of them now, heading towards something important. When I reached the office building, I stopped for a moment, looking up. The place was massive, its glass windows reflecting the bright sunlight. This was it. This was where my future could begin. Walking inside, I was immediately met with the cool air of the lobby. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Name, please?" I told her, and she nodded, typing something on her computer. "You can have a seat. The hiring manager will call you shortly." I thanked her and walked toward the waiting area. There were a few other candidates sitting there, all dressed in their best, just like me. Some looked calm, some were nervously tapping their feet, and a few were scrolling through their phones, probably trying to distract themselves from the nerves. That's when I noticed him. A man sitting a few seats away, dressed in a well-fitted suit, his posture straight, his hands clasped together. He looked confident, maybe even too confident. There was something about the way he carried himself, like he had already decided he was getting the job. For a moment I wondered, is he my competition? I shook the thought away. Focus on yourself. I looked down at my resume, scanning it one last time. The room was silent except for the occasional clicking of a pen or the distant hum of office chatter. Then the door to the interview room opened and a voice called out a name. The man in the suit stood up, adjusted his tie, and walked toward the door with smooth confidence. I watched as he disappeared inside. A strange feeling settled in my chest, but I couldn't tell what it was. Maybe it was just nerves. I leaned back in my seat, exhaling slowly. Now, all I had to do was wait. I sat in the waiting area, my fingers gripping my resume a little tighter. The man in the suit had walked into the interview room with such confidence, like he already knew the job was his. I wondered how it was going for him. At first, everything seemed normal. The door remained shut, and the quiet hum of the office filled the air. But as the minutes ticked by, something felt off. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The other candidates were waiting patiently, scrolling through their phones or tapping their feet. I glanced at the receptionist, who seemed just as curious. Then, out of nowhere, bam! The door to the interview room flew open. The man stormed out, his face twisted in anger. His sharp, polished look from earlier was gone. His tie was loose, his hands clenched into fists. His entire body seemed tense, like he was holding something back. The room went silent. Every head turned toward him. I could feel the shift in the air. The other candidates straightened in their seats. The receptionist's eyebrows shot up, and even I found myself frozen in place. Behind him, the interviewer stepped out, his face tight with frustration. "That was completely unprofessional," he said, shaking his head. The man didn't respond. He just muttered something under his breath and walked past me. His footsteps were heavy, his breathing uneven. I watched him for a second, debating whether to say something. What happened in there? But before I could even process it, the interviewer turned to the receptionist and said, "Send in the next candidate." A beat of silence. Then my name was called. My stomach flipped. My pulse quickened. It's my turn. I stood up, smoothing out my shirt, but my mind was racing. What had gone wrong with that guy? Did he mess up that badly? Did he say something offensive? I tried to shake the thoughts away. Focus on yourself. You're here for your own chance. As I walked past the man, he was leaning against the wall, staring at the floor. His expression was unreadable. Anger, disappointment, maybe even regret. I took a deep breath, placed my hand on the doorknob and stepped inside. Whatever had happened before me, it didn't matter now. This was my moment. As I stepped inside, the air felt heavier, as if the tension from the last interview still lingered in the room. The interviewer sat at the large wooden desk, his fingers tapping lightly against the surface. He let out a deep breath, shaking his head before finally looking up at me. "Please, have a seat," he said, his voice calmer now, but still carrying a hint of frustration. I sat down, gripping my resume tightly in my lap. My heart was still racing from what I had just witnessed. The way that man had stormed out. It wasn't normal. Something had clearly gone wrong. The interviewer leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Did you see the man who just left?" I nodded. Yes, he was sitting near me in the waiting area. The interviewer sighed, rubbing his temple. That was one of the most difficult interviews I've ever had. I stayed quiet, unsure if I should respond. He continued. At first, he seemed like a strong candidate, well-spoken, confident, experienced. But the moment we started asking about teamwork and problem-solving, things changed. I frowned. What do you mean? The interviewer shook his head. He got defensive. He refused to answer some of the questions properly. When we asked about handling conflicts with co-workers, he scoffed and said he didn't trust anyone. He claimed that people always try to bring him down and that he works better alone. I blinked, taken aback. Who says that in an interview? That's not even the worst part, the interviewer continued. When we pressed him for more details, he completely lost his temper. He accused us of setting him up, of trying to make him look bad. He even raised his voice at one point. I was speechless. He could have been a strong contender, the interviewer said with a sigh. But attitude matters just as much as skills. No company wants someone who refuses to work with others. I nodded slowly, absorbing everything. The man had looked so confident when he walked in. He had dressed well, carried himself with pride. But none of that had mattered in the end. His mindset, his inability to stay calm under pressure, that's what had cost him the opportunity. I took a deep breath. This was my chance to do better. The interviewer straightened in his chair, flipping through my resume. Then he looked at me with a more neutral expression. All right, let's start fresh. Tell me about yourself. I sat up straight, ready. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was my moment. The interviewer looked at me expectantly, waiting for my response. I could still feel the weight of what had just happened in the room, but I pushed it aside. This was my interview, my chance to prove myself. I started speaking, introducing myself with a steady voice. I talked about my background, my skills, and why I was excited about the opportunity. As I spoke, I noticed the interviewer's posture change. He leaned in slightly, nodding as he listened. With each question, I focused on staying calm and professional. When he asked about teamwork, I shared a story about a time I collaborated with a difficult colleague and how we found a way to work together. When he asked how I handled pressure, I gave an example of a challenging project and how I stayed focused. The more I spoke, the more confident I felt. Unlike the last candidate, I didn't let my emotions take over. I didn't see the interviewer as an enemy trying to trick me. I saw him as someone who wanted to understand if I was the right fit. At one point he smiled and said, "That's a great answer." That small comment gave me a surge of confidence. I kept going, answering each question thoughtfully. As the interview went on, I could tell the mood had shifted. The frustration the interviewer had felt earlier was gone. The tension in the room had faded. Finally, he set his pen down and leaned back. "Well," he said with a small smile, "this was refreshing." I couldn't help but smile back. I had done it. I had stayed composed, given honest answers, and handled the situation professionally. The interviewer glanced at my resume one last time before looking up. "We'll be in touch soon," he said. I shook his hand firmly, thanked him for his time, and walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I let out a small breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Stepping out of that room, I felt lighter. I had no idea if I had gotten the job yet, but one thing was clear. No matter the outcome, I had given it my best. As I stepped out of the interview room, a strange mix of relief and anticipation settled in my chest. The air outside felt different, lighter, clearer. The waiting area was quieter now, a few candidates still sitting lost in their own thoughts. I walked past the man from earlier, who was still leaning against the wall, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the floor. He looked lost in his own frustration. For a second I thought about what had happened in that room before me. He had walked in confident, sure of himself, but confidence alone wasn't enough. The receptionist gave me a small smile as I approached the exit. "How did it go?" she asked. I smiled back, feeling proud. "I think it went well," she nodded. "Good luck." I thanked her and stepped outside. The sun was shining and the fresh air filled my lungs as I took a deep breath. It was over. Now all I could do was wait. Days passed and the anticipation grew. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a rush of nervous energy, hoping it was the call. Then, one afternoon, it happened. The number flashed on my screen and my heart pounded as I picked up. "Hello?" a familiar voice spoke. "Hi, this is the hiring manager from the interview. Do you have a moment?" "Yes, of course," I said, my hands suddenly cold. There was a pause, then, "We'd like to offer you the position." For a second I didn't react. My brain was still processing the words. Then warmth spread through my chest. I had done it. "Thank you so much," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The hiring manager chuckled. "You gave a great interview. We're excited to have you on board." After finishing the call, I sat there for a moment, my phone still in my hand. I thought back to that day, the nerves, the uncertainty, the man who had left the interview room in anger. It all made sense now. Skills and experience matter, but attitude is just as important. The way we handle pressure, the way we treat people, and the way we carry ourselves, those are the things that truly define us. As I looked ahead, I knew this was just the beginning, a new chapter, a new opportunity, and I was ready for it.